Hi, everyone, and welcome. This presentation is to go over developing a patient complexity assessment tool for Indigenous peoples, specifically the Expert Delphi survey. So to start off with a bit of background information, patient complexity has been described as the interacting impact of biological, socioeconomic, cultural, environmental, and behavioral forces that shape health. It's deemed to arise from contextual factors rather than just having multimorbidities or a patient having high resource utilization. It typically results in a patient with frequent presentation being dissatisfied with their overall treatment plan and, most importantly, being unable to resolve their ongoing health issues. We have these things called patient complexity assessment tools, or PCATs, which are utilized to collect vital information to effectively deliver care to patients with complexity. Now, the purpose of these tools is to really provide a comprehensive assessment or give a full picture of what's really going on with the patient so that the healthcare provider can then engage in the appropriate course of action to resolve any ongoing health issues. Indigenous patients in clinical settings are typically viewed as having complex health needs, but there's no existing PCAT which has been developed for use with this patient population. Now, the gap here is that existing PCATs only really consider certain determinants and they ignore factors that are unique to Indigenous peoples, such as social exclusion circumstances, ongoing colonialism, and they largely ignore the impacts of things like intergenerational trauma. Existing tools also don't really take into account the Indigenous conceptualizations of health and wellness. So the overarching purpose of this project then is to develop a PCAT which is really suitable to the needs of Indigenous peoples. We divided this research up into three main phases. So in phase one, we aim to investigate existing PCATs and how inclusive they are of the social realities that shape the health of Indigenous patients. In phase two, we sought out to identify the factors that contribute to health complexity among Indigenous patients. And finally, in phase three, which is where we are now, we want to determine the best set of items to identify and address health complexity among Indigenous patients. So to give a bit of background about each of the phases, phase one was our scoping review. The purpose of this was to identify PCATs that include the inquiry of domains which are relevant in the care of Indigenous patients with complexity. So we looked at all existing PCATs that we could find and we pooled together all of their items. So in a pool of over 300 items, we found only 6 items from 5 tools that somewhat addressed some of the social domains of the social realities which are relevant to Indigenous patients. But overall, none of these items were really comprehensive enough to be used in a clinical setting. Of the 300 items, we also identified this need to really contextualize the items so that they can be relevant for Indigenous patient populations. In phase two, we conducted patient interviews. Now, the objective of these were to identify and critically examine the components of health complexity for urban Indigenous peoples. So we conducted these semi-structured relational conversations with 9 urban Indigenous patients to really determine what should be included in an Indigenous PCAT. We identified these additional factors that need to be included. The first one being recognizing the role of healthcare violence in perpetuating health complexity, taking into account material resource disparities and adverse life experiences, which are a reality for many Indigenous peoples and can shape health, but also to take into account the role of resilience and protective factors as having sort of a strengths-based lens to our approach in assessing complexity. So we had this item pool of over 300 items from existing PCATs, and based on our research and our interviews, we turned it into an item pool of over 60 items of reduced and contextualized items. But having over 60 items is still a lot for a clinical tool. So now we're proposing an e-Delphi process so that we can reduce these items to a feasible amount for a clinical tool. We've added these items to a survey, and as you'll see in this diagram here, all of the items span across 9 different domains. And in our proposed tool, we have 2 different sections. There's certain domains that the patient would complete and certain domains that are for the healthcare provider to look at. Now, in our Delphi survey, we have different concepts within each of the different domains. As you'll see here in the biological domain, we have 4 concepts that would be completed from the patient's perspective and 2 sub-concepts from the provider's perspective. Now we'll go into an example so we can talk through this. So as a first step, we really need to determine if all of the concepts should be included in the tool. Here's an example. If we're looking at a domain of breakfast foods, the 3 concepts in breakfast foods could be donuts, eggs, and fruit. And each of these concepts have several different questions within them. For example, we could be asking what type of donuts, how we like our eggs, and what type of fruits should be included. So in round 1, we're not going to be presenting the items, we're only presenting the concepts. So you would be voting on whether or not donuts, eggs, and fruit should be included as part of breakfast foods. And as in this example here, you can see that donuts and eggs should be included, but fruit maybe should not be included. Then in rounds 2 and 3, you'll have the opportunity to actually vote on the items to determine if they are effective in the context of an Indigenous PCAT. In this example again, you'll see that because we voted out fruit in round 1, we're not presenting any of the items pertaining to what type of fruits we should be including. In the concept of eggs, you'll see questions 2 and 3 made the cut, but question 1 was voted as irrelevant. And in donuts, you'll see that question 3 made the cut, question 2 didn't, but question 1 is the unsure question. So this is an item or a question that didn't really meet the criteria to be included or excluded. And that means that we'll have the opportunity to talk about it, and this one item is going to be presented again in round 3. So as you'll see, I've taken a screenshot of the actual survey here. So you're going to be voting on the items, and then you'll have a space to indicate your reasoning, because we're going to pull together these reports so that everyone can see the comments of other experts as well. So at the end of this, and at the end of every domain, there's a space for you to indicate any suggestions or thoughts as well after you vote. So here's a schedule. Round 1 begins on Monday, October 3rd and goes until October 7th. And again, in round 1, you'll be voting on the actual concepts within each domain. After that, we'll compile these reports that will be presented to you on October 11th and 12th. And you'll get to see how you voted in relation to the median. And you'll also have a chance to read the comments of others and see what other experts are thinking. In round 2, it will be from October 13th to October 19th. This is going to be your chance to vote on the actual items from each of the concepts now. After round 2, we're going to hold a group discussion on October 24th from 9 to 11 a.m. We're going to gather as a group to really review the items that have not really made the cutoff to be included or excluded. So all of our unsure items, and we can see what we've included so far. If you're unable to attend this group discussion, don't worry, we'll have a summary provided based on what we discussed. And you'll also receive another report of how you voted in round 2 in relation to the votes of others. Finally, round 3 will take place from October 26th until November 1st. And this will be our last chance to reduce the items for our proposed tool. So in terms of next steps, you would have received an email on October 3rd, including a consent form, an information sheet, which basically highlights this presentation, and a link to the survey. You'll also receive an invitation for the group discussion that is going to take place on October 24th. I'll be sending out reminders for you to complete your survey midweek. At the end of round 1, make sure to include your email address if you would like to be included for rounds 2 and 3. Once you complete the survey, you'll also automatically receive a copy of your results, and you will receive a report from me. If you have any more questions about this process or about the project generally, My email is listed below so you can contact me. Thank you.